like to ask for unanimous consent to recognize Congressman Hensarling for a minute and a half.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the committee allowing me to participate. I'm not here today to have the debate about how worthy the IMF may be, but I am here today to raise the question on whether or not today is the time that the United States should be committing an extra $100 billion of taxpayer money to the IMF. That's a commitment of $861 for every American household. This comes on top of $6,034 to fund the $700 billion worth of bailout money last September, $9,810 to fund the $1.13 trillion government stimulus plan, $3,534 per American household to fund a $410 billion omnibus spending plan. We are now borrowing 46 cents for every dollar that the government spends. This Congress just passed a budget which will triple the national debt in just 10 years. Yesterday, we received the news from the Medicare trustees, no surprise here, that Medicare is going broke sooner than we had thought. It will be going flat broke in 2017, 2 years earlier than projected. And they tell us the unfunded liability of Medicare over a 75-year period is up an additional $1.8 trillion. At some point, I think we have to ask ourselves the question, is there any limit to the liability exposure we're willing to place on the American taxpayer? Is there any limit to the amount of debt that we are willing to place on our children and our grandchildren? Now, I know some will argue that for CBO scoring purposes, this shouldn't actually be scored. This is simply an asset transfer. We're just extending a $100 billion line of credit. Well, we heard the very same argument in favor of Freddie and Fannie. We were told there would never be any taxpayer liability there. Well, we kind of know how that story turned out. And if press reports are credible, we understand that this request may be attached to the war supplemental. I mean, how do we explain to our constituents then that Congress may be on the verge of committing more money to the IMF and to foreign nations than committing to our American troops in the field? That's certainly not something I care to try to explain. And when so many of our own citizens are having trouble paying for accessing credit to refinance their homes, their interest rates are going up on their credit cards are being withdrawn from the market, and I believe certainly Congress has exacerbated that trend. How do we tell them that you can't get credit, but we're going to make you more exposed as a taxpayer to give foreign nations more credit? I think this is an incredibly poor time to be putting an additional $100 billion of taxpayer liability exposure for an additional contribution to the IMF. And again, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the indulgence of the committee for allowing me to speak, and I yield back the balance of my time.